This afternoon we have portfolio questions on finance, employment and sustainable growth. Question 1, Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what plans it has to review business rates.
Minister Derek Mackay.
The Scottish Government intends to review business rates later this year.
Mark MacDonald.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Minister, during the course of that review, what intentions he has at present towards the small business bonus scheme? Obviously, it's been extremely popular with small businesses and many of them have seen great benefits derived from it. Does he foresee that having a key role to play moving forward?
Minister.
The review will consider how the business rate system can better support business and economic growth. It will cover a range of issues, including whether the council tax breaks, which are worth over current tax breaks, are worth over £540 million this year, are effective, rating appeals, transparency, tax avoidance and other matters. However, we have committed to continue the small business bonus scheme for the lifetime of the Parliament, providing a lifeline to over 85,000 small business premises across Scotland.
Thank you. Supplementary, Alex Johnston.
Thank you. Could I ask the Minister to consider the situation which arose in a number of places in Scotland, but particularly in Ballater in the North East, where a revaluation resulted in businesses going from 100% discount under the small business bonus scheme to receiving no discount at all, and whether there is a means by which small businesses can in future be protected from such changes?
Minister.
I can confirm to Mr Johnston that such matters can feature as a part of the review that we're about to conduct.
Thank you very much. Question 2, John Park.
Thank you, President Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it includes the rates of pay of temporary and agency staff when considering public sector pay levels.
Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, we do not directly take into account the pay of temporary and agency staff when considering public sector pay policy. In taking decisions on public sector pay levels, we look at the impact of each of the elements on pay policy on the wider public sector, as well as for the bodies directly subject to the pay policy.
John Park.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that response and also welcome the decision that's been taken by the Scottish Government to ensure that all directly employed employees are paid the living wage. I'm sure he might agree with me that if you have a group of employees who are working for the Scottish Government, or indeed any employer, who are perhaps paid under what is seen as a going rate in terms of the living wage, that might encourage the employer to look at expanding the use of agency and temporary workers. Can I ask what the Scottish Government's view is on ensuring that the living wage is extended to agency and temporary workers who work in the Scottish Government?
Cabinet Secretary.
The first point I'd confirm to Mr Park is that the government's preference in terms of employment arrangements is not to encourage temporary and agency staff use, because we much prefer having our employment arrangements structured around permanent employees, and I'm sure it's a point that Mr Park would welcome. Clearly, secondly, because the government has committed itself to the implementation of the living wage, we would of course encourage others to follow our example, as we continue to do, and as we see, I think, as I mentioned in the debate yesterday, an increasing prevalence within the local authority community, and clearly within the private sector there is an opportunity to emulate what the government has taken forward in this respect. So I can assure him that in our pay arrangements we are trying to maximise the proportion of our employees who are in fact permanent staff, and they will of course carry entitlement to the living wage arrangements, and we will continue to encourage others to follow the leadership that the government has demonstrated on this issue.
Thank you. Question 3, Jamie McGregor. That, Minister. Please respond then.
Business improvement districts such as those in Inverness and Elgin enable the private and public sectors to work together and invest in improvements to the local business environment, while contributing to the wider regeneration of the local community. Businesses also benefit from the sharing of good practice across bid areas.
Jamie McGregor.
Well, I thank the Minister for that answer. He may probably be aware that Oban businesses in Argyll are currently voting on whether to establish a bid in the town with the result of the postal ballot due in early October, will he join me in paying tribute to the Bid for Oban team, who are seeking to get support from their fellow business people for their positive proposal? And does he agree that a bid in Oban has the potential to boost the local economy and support local retailers, as has happened in other bids elsewhere?
Minister.
Yes, absolutely. The Scottish Government would concur with those words, and there are a number of bids being developed at the moment, 18 actually at the development stage, 6 of which are in Mr McGregor's own constituency. So I hope that the Oban result is positive and leads to change and further contributes to the agenda such as the Accord project to regenerate that community.
Supplementary, Christina McKelvey.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. The Minister is obviously aware of how beneficial the bid process can be and how setting up a bid can benefit a community. Jamie McGregor said very eloquently how it's supporting Oban. I wonder if the Minister is aware that in Hamilton they are too going through the bid process with their ballot due on the 11th of October. And can I extend an invitation to the Minister from the Chamber of Commerce in Hamilton to come and visit Hamilton just before the bid to lend his support to the ballot, please?
Minister.
I can confirm to Ms McKelvey that we do indeed support that bid, and I personally support that bid, and diary permitting, I will try and make the deadline in terms of the ballot. I look forward to a positive outcome and hope that this too can help regenerate communities such as Hamilton.
Excellent. Question 4, Stuart McMillan.
To ask the Scottish Government what recent action it has taken to promote tourism in West Scotland.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
Presiding Officer, the West of Scotland is promoted through Visit Scotland's suite of marketing activity, including on the organisation's national tourism website, which receives circa 13 million visits annually.
Stuart McMillan.
Thank you very much. Last weekend I attended a few of the Doors Open Day events in Inverclyde. I'm sure colleagues from across the Chamber did in their parts of the world as well. But I was disappointed that Newark Castle and Port Glasgow actually wasn't involved this year, when it actually has been in previous years. So I can ask the Minister to actually speak to Historic Scotland to encourage them to actually reconsider this decision for future years, please.
Minister.
I thank the member for notice of the content of the question. Doors Open Day gives visitors free access, Presiding Officer, to hundreds of fascinating buildings across Scotland. Buildings, however, that are normally closed, such as, for example, the Iron Brew factory, which members may be interested in visiting. However, the point of the event is that the doors should be open for buildings that are normally closed to the public. In the case of Newark Castle, I'm advised, Presiding Officer, that it is already open to the public 7 days a week from the 1st April to the 30th September, and it was for that reason that Historic Scotland decided not to include it in this year's event. Nonetheless, I take this opportunity to commend as well to colleagues a visit to Newark Castle before the 30th September.
Thank you very much. Question 5, John Lamont.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what its position is on figures showing an 8.2% drop in retail sales in 2011 and an average 17% drop in high street footfall across 8 towns in the Borders in the last 4 years.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, the Government takes a number of steps to support Scotland's retail sector through actions such as the Scottish Business Bonus, the Small Business Bonus Scheme and other reliefs which provide zero or reduced business rates for 63% of retail premises in Scotland. The Scottish Government is also working to provide support for our town centres. On the 9th of September, the Deputy First Minister announced details of the Scottish Government's National Town Centre Review. As part of this review, we are working with the Scottish Retail Consortium to consider the role of the modern town centre in 21st century Scotland.
John Lamont.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer. However, towns such as Selkirk and Duns in my constituency have seen drops of up to 30% in footfall on their high streets, and retailers are crying out for more help from the Scottish Government. Instead, the Government are hitting them further with damaging measures such as SNP's retail tax, which has led to an increase by 95 million in business rates. Will the Scottish Government finally take real steps to help Scottish shops and businesses and high streets and stop this hugely damaging measure?
Cabinet Secretary.
It's some years, I have to say, to my shame, since I've been in Duns, but I can't imagine that there are many properties in Duns that will be paying the government's public health supplement. If I'm incorrect on that, Mr Lamont can correct me, but he's not doing it so far, so I think I'm on safe ground here. So I think that Mr Lamont's point is utterly misplaced, given the fact that the government is providing for, I would imagine, the majority of retailers in Dunn's town centre or in other town centres that he mentioned, the support through either reduced or business rates or business rates that are zero, which I think is a very direct contribution to the town centres that he referred to. There's also other activity that the government puts forward through the work that my colleague Mr Lochhead takes forward on food and drink, for example, where we are actively encouraging the quality of local produce, and Mr Lamont represents a part of Scotland which has got a fine reputation for quality of local produce, for it to be available and promoted in the localities, and that's an essential part of linking together all the reasons why people should shop locally in some of the fine towns and communities that Mr Lamont represents.
Thank you very much. Question 6, Fiona MacLeod.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government how it will use the budget to address the reductions in the block grant from the UK Government.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, within the financial constraints imposed, we are maximising the impact of our spending on the economy, jobs and improving public services. Subject to the further detail in next week's draft budget, I can outline our approach. We are prioritising infrastructure investment to generate jobs and stimulate growth, accelerating capital investment. We're also switching revenue to capital and using the non-profit distributing pipeline. Announcements in February and June further committed over £500 million to infrastructure over the period to 2014-15. Meanwhile, we are protecting NHS budgets, maintaining 1,000 additional police officers, upholding the council tax freeze, ensuring no tuition fees, improving school quality and maintaining teacher numbers. All this is set against continuing real terms year-on-year cuts to the Scottish budget. The UK Government's economic strategy has failed, and their austerity approach is at odds with the wishes of the people of Scotland.
Fiona MacLeod.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for that answer and look forward to the detail of the budget in the coming weeks. But can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, if Westminster finally gave the go-ahead to the Scottish Government's list of shovel-ready projects, such as the University of Glasgow Centre for Virology Research, proposed for the Garscube estate in my constituency, how much of an impact would this have for construction and employment in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
The Government has estimated that the list of projects that we've put to the UK Government would have, if applied, would have the effect of supporting more than 4,000 jobs, and we estimate around 60% of those jobs would be in the construction sector. And I think any of us who visit any of the construction sites that are underway in Scotland today notice very clearly the significant personnel that are involved in the management and operation of these sites, and encouraging further projects and capital investment will be a welcome contribution to economic recovery.
Thank you. Question 7 has not been lodged for understandable reasons. Question 8, Colin Beattie.
To ask the Scottish Government what the impact on the economy would be if the shovel-ready projects proposed to the UK Government were approved.
Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, as I mentioned in my answer to Fiona MacLeod, if the projects that are on the list that the Government has provided were taken forward, this would provide an immediate boost to the construction sector and the wider economy by supporting more than 4,000 jobs. They would help kickstart wider private sector investment, and they would provide a double benefit to the economy of a short-term benefit from the building of the assets and the long-term benefit from the use of them. The Scottish Government recognises the importance of sustained capital investment, and we have repeatedly called for action from Westminster to bring forward capital investment now in order to boost the economy.
Thank you. Colin Beattie.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his response. In my own constituency of Midlothian North and Musselburgh, even a small proportion of the work related to the £300 million of shovel-ready projects would help kickstart a local economy which relies substantially on construction-related projects for its prosperity. Would the Cabinet Secretary agree that the UK Chancellor and the Westminster Government are significantly failing the people of Scotland in refusing to back the Scottish Government's efforts to maintain employment, jobs and prosperity in Scotland?
Cabinet Secretary.
One of the points I would make to Mr Beattie in agreeing with the thrust of his question is that this morning my first engagement was with the Fife Economy Partnership and involved a range of members from the Fife Chamber of Commerce. And it was pretty clear to me of the concerns expressed about the health of the construction sector at that event, even this morning, that the type of investments that Mr Beattie has talked about are of real relevance in stimulating local economies. And I can assure Mr Beattie that the Government will continue to pursue this approach with the UK Government. The essential impact of these projects is that they provide immediate economic benefit in the localities of Scotland, but they also have the effect of creating wider investment confidence, which is crucial to meeting the challenges that we face today. So I certainly assure the member that the Government will continue to pursue that line of argument with the United Kingdom Government, and of course I'm also considering these issues as I plan the budget statement to be given to Parliament next Thursday.
Many thanks. Supplementary from Ken McIntosh.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask Mr Swinney what has been the impact on the Scottish economy and on joblessness in particular of his own decision as Finance Minister to cut £86 million from the housing budget?
I'm surprised that Mr McIntosh has returned to this territory after the explanation that was given to him so forcefully yesterday by the Deputy First Minister, who was able to demonstrate that although this Government has of necessity had to allocate a lower amount of money to the housing budget because of the 33% cut in our budget, which of course, to be fair to my Conservative colleagues, is a lower cut to the budget than would have been applied had Mr McIntosh's friends remained in the United Kingdom Government. Despite those difficulties, we have still been able to build more social houses and therefore to support construction employment than was the case under Mr McIntosh's administration. And of course, that is added to by the schools that are being built, the roads that are being developed, the bridges that are being built, and the other projects that have been taken forward in Scotland today. Now, what I'd say to Mr McIntosh is I think there is strong ground for good agreement to be reached in this Parliament of making the point to the United Kingdom Government that the reductions in capital investment have gone too far, and we need, given all of the information that I marshalled in Parliament yesterday, there is an absolute necessity for there to be a sustained investment in capital projects, and we hope that we will have his support in making that case to the United Kingdom Government.
Thank you very much. Question 9, Michael McMahon.
Thank you. To ask the Scottish Government what measure it will put in place to stimulate the construction sector.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
In the face of UK Government cuts to the Scottish capital budget of over 30%, the Scottish Government is maximising its capital expenditure to support infrastructure investment and jobs across Scotland. We are switching more than £700 million from resource to capital spending over the spending review period. We are taking forward a new programme of non-profit distribution investment worth £2,500 million. As a result, total capital spending will be over 25% higher in 2014-15 than in 2011-12.
Michael McMahon.
I thank the Minister for his response. In the past few months, as he will know, my constituency, amongst other setbacks, has lost over 500 jobs at WJ Hart, has recently seen Laing O'Rourke decide to close its Bison concrete plant, where it makes an array of products for the construction sector, and Terex, where 70 jobs have been announced, losses have been announced, and it is to go into short-time working. I recently visited Terex and was disappointed to learn just how little support and advice it had received from government bodies at a time it's facing its most difficult period in years due to contraction in its main markets overseas, which are very dependent on the economies of America and China. Will the Minister investigate why Terex believes that it's being overlooked and not considered favourably in relation to ticking all the boxes because it doesn't put up wind turbines, and rather it makes equipment to build roads and to dig quarries?
Minister.
Presiding Officer, we certainly agree and are acutely aware of the difficulties that the construction sector faces across Scotland. And the member knows very well that we make every effort to engage with businesses and will certainly do so in the Terex case as well, since he has raised it now in the Chamber. And I give him the undertaking that I will personally look into that case and I will report back to him as quickly as is possible. He also knows that I engaged with him in relation to the W.J. Hart case, and I have to say the response in that very difficult situation by PACE was, I think, welcomed by himself and those employees who had the opportunity to take part in the PACE services. In fact, 38 out of the 48 who attended one of the events said that it couldn't really have been better, and that was a tribute, particularly from people in a very difficult situation, were able to recognise that the PACE service in Scotland, over successive governments, has been very good. These are very serious matters. We have brought forward a whole range of construction projects. I don't have time to read out all of the list, but the reason why we've transferred that money to capital is precisely to address the issues that Michael McMahon quite fairly raises today.
Thank you very much. Question 10, Bob Doris.
To ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the future of Remploy factories in Scotland.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
Scottish ministers and officials are in regular contact with the UK Government regarding the future of Remploy factories in Scotland. I have been engaged directly in dialogue with Maria Miller, the former UK Minister for Disabled People. Following the UK Cabinet reshuffle, the new Minister, Esther McVey, will meet with me during a visit to the Scottish Parliament, Presiding Officer, in October. Parallel to this ministerial engagement, I have set up a stakeholder group which includes the DWP, Remploy, the trade unions GMB and Unite, Scottish Enterprise, Just Enterprise, the voluntary sector, COSLA and PACE partners. PACE is Scotland's redundancy support and advice service. The group has met under my chairmanship on 3 occasions already and meets again on the 19th of September. It is working with the DWP to ensure the best possible outcomes for Remploy staff.
Bob Doris.
Thank the Minister for that answer. The Minister will be aware of my ongoing concerns in relation to both the sales process for Remploy Springburn and how workers and unions have been treated. Does the Minister agree with me that with the new Minister, Esther McVey MP, now in charge of disability issues at a UK level, this is an opportunity for the UK Government to rethink its approach to guarantee workers' rights under 2Pay and reconsider both detrimental pension and redundancy conditions? And will he, when he meets the Minister, make such representations to her as I have done so already?
Minister.
Well, Bob Doris has raised issues regarding Springburn in his constituency, as have members across this chamber from all parties regarding the plight of the Remploy workforce. I cannot think of any workforce who are more deserving of our support, nor who are more vulnerable than the Remploy workforce. At all stages, we have made our views about the decisions that the UK Government took crystal clear, and we adhere to those. Our duty now is to do the very best with the situation as it is, not as we would prefer it to be. In that respect, we will continue to do everything possible to assist the workers who are affected in Remploy factories throughout Scotland, not only those in Phase 1 who have faced the immediate prospect of redundancy, but also those in other factories whose future is to them very uncertain indeed. And I'm sure we will come back to this issue on many occasions in this chamber in the months ahead.
Thank you. Supplementary from Patricia Ferguson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Minister for his support. But he will be aware that the Leader of Scottish Labour has written to him asking if it would be possible for the Scottish Government to consider a range of measures like those put forward by the Welsh Assembly Government, so that employers who wish to take on redundant ex-workers from Remploy would be assisted for a period of up to 4 years to do so, in order that they can carry out necessary modifications to their premises and other related matters. He may not be aware, but I have written to the Equal Opportunities Committee of this Parliament, asking that they undertake an inquiry into the entire issue of Remploy, because there are, as Bob Doris rightly said, a number of issues about the way this has been taken forward. So I wonder if the Minister can indicate whether he intends to agree to Ms Lamont's proposals and whether he will back mine.
Minister.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not aware of all of these matters, and in particular I'm not aware of any detailed proposals having been received, but I undertake to Patricia Ferguson that we will look into that and any correspondence received and reply as swiftly as possible. Plainly, we will look very seriously at any workable, appropriate measures that can be taken. That is why we work so closely with people involved, such as the trade union representatives who have sat with other colleagues on the stakeholder group that I have chaired on 3 occasions and will chair again on the 19th of September. We are also looking at and this is something that my colleague Nicola Sturgeon will now be pursuing, the way in which we can assist supported workplaces through local government procurement. That is an area where we have done a sterling amount of work, and I believe it does offer hope for the future. And finally, Presiding Officer, we are also looking, of course, albeit we are not in the driving seat here because we are not in charge of the process of trying to ensure that the existing Remploy factories that face closure have every chance of continuing under new ownership or management. We very much hope that that can be achieved for as many of the factories as is possible. It's a challenging task, but it's one that we look forward to working with all members in pursuing over the very short period in the next few weeks.
Thank you very much. Question 11, Graham Day.
To ask the Scottish Government how it plans to work with local authorities to improve performance in relation to the planning system.
Minister Derek Mackay.
We are determined to see an improvement in performance across Scotland, and have already worked closely with planning authorities on the new planning performance framework. Authorities' first performance reports are due this month, and we will discuss them with the implementation of the service and their improvement priorities.
Graham Day.
Can I thank the Minister for his response? Now, whilst councils can at times create difficulties by the way in which they interpret planning guidelines, it's also the case that being at the coalface gives them a feel for how the system might be simplified and improved. Can I ask the Minister what ongoing opportunities might be afforded individual local authorities to feed into the process of future reform, or will the Scottish Government engage only indirectly via COSLA?
Minister.
There's a range of activities that can be undertaken to ensure that individual local authorities' voices are heard through the professional organisation Heads of Planning Scotland, through the ongoing consultation on planning reform next steps, through the National Planning Performance Framework itself and the Performance Framework. So there's a range of ways in which they can contribute to how planning should be shaped to support sustainable economic growth in this country.
Supplementary, Alex Johnson.
Thank you very much. The Minister will be aware that Eric Pickles announced in the House of Commons last week the intention south of the border to relax certain planning laws, including a temporary suspension of certain requirements. Has the Minister considered whether these would be appropriate in Scotland, given that they could boost the economy, boost construction and, through reducing council workloads, perhaps improve their efficiency?
Minister.
I can inform Mr Johnson that next week I'll return to Parliament with a statement on planning matters that's very comprehensive and will show that once again the Scottish Government is ahead of our UK counterparts on matters including planning and supporting economic recovery. Of course, we will compare whatever measures are announced in England or other places and ensure that we have a competitive edge in Scotland. And I'm sure that Mr Johnson will listen very carefully to the announcements I make to Parliament next week.
Thank you very much. Question 12, Mary Fee.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government whether it will provide additional funding to local authorities in the west of Scotland to deal with unemployment, deprivation and poverty.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, sustainable employment is critical to addressing disadvantage and poverty. The Scottish Government is providing a range of funding to local authorities in the west of Scotland to support this. Local authorities in the region received £599,241 this year specifically to support the delivery of opportunities for all, including 16+ learning choices and activity agreements. Additionally, North Ayrshire and Renfrewshire local authorities within the West of Scotland region are receiving £1.6 million of the extra £9 million funding available this year to support youth employment. These authorities are also benefiting from ESF funding of £19.8 million until September 2013 and £4.3 million of ERDF funding until July 2014.
Mary Fee.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for his answer. However, would the Cabinet Secretary agree that cutting the revenue allocation to Renfrewshire Council, which received the fifth worst cut, has a serious impact on services that the most disadvantaged depend on?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as Mary Fee will know, and as I think I explained to her on what we might call the picket lines of the Cabinet meeting in Renfrew, along with her colleagues Jim Sheridan and Douglas Alexander, members of Parliament, that the funding settlement for Renfrewshire Council is driven essentially by the local authority distribution formula, which is agreed by all local authorities in Scotland through the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities. It is essentially a population-based formula which predominantly structures the amount of resources that are allocated to individual localities, but due account is taken within that formula of deprivation, in other circumstances of rurality and sparsity of population, and a variety of other indicators to try to arrive at the fairest distribution of resources around the country. The mechanism was last reviewed in the spending review and was signed up to by all local authorities in Scotland.
Thank you very much. Question 13, Jamie Hepburn.
To ask the Scottish Government whether it has received clear information from the UK Government regarding its plans for public sector pension reform.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, in March 2012 we entered in good faith into negotiations with stakeholders to develop pension scheme designs which were appropriate for Scottish circumstances. Since then, the UK Government has indicated that it intends to use its forthcoming Public Service Pensions Reform Bill to prescribe a number of significant constraints to that process. This has changed the context of our negotiations significantly, and I am actively pressing the UK Government for further clarity as a matter of urgency.
Jamie Hepburn.
Well, I wonder if the Cabinet Secretary might be able to tell us what the issues are that the UK Government has thus far not provided clarity on, and that he is seeking such clarity, and how these issues may impact on the ability to negotiate.
Cabinet Secretary.
In terms of these issues, as I have indicated in my earlier response, are the subject of active correspondence with the Treasury. I wrote to the Chief Secretary to the Treasury most recently on the 7th of September, and that is one of a number of letters that I have written seeking clarity on these points. There are a number of constraints that I expect will be, I understand will be set out in the Public Service Pension Reform Bill, which will be published later this week by the United Kingdom Government. Amongst the key issues will be clarity over whether or not an absolute link is going to be established in statute between the normal pension age and the state pension age, which would be an area, I think, of significant scope for negotiation if there was to be any flexibility. I fear that such a link will be established in statute, which will thereafter make it reduce flexibility in negotiating pension scheme arrangements within Scotland. There may also be other characteristics within the bill which will restrict our ability to undertake negotiation within Scotland, and I'm particularly interested to know whether the powers and the responsibility of ministers in the Scottish Government will in any way be eroded by the implications of the bill, which may involve the Treasury being able to exercise control over changes to scheme regulations beyond the current areas of activity that are involved in this process. So I'm unable to give an absolutely clear answer to Mr Hepburn's question just now, but I do suspect that some of these details will become clear in the not too distant future.
Many thanks. Question 14, Ian Gray.
To ask the Scottish Government what it is doing to tackle long-term unemployment.
Cabinet Secretary John Swinney.
Presiding Officer, the Government is taking a range of actions to tackle the issue of long-term unemployment, which is captured in the budget proposals and capital programmes taken forward by the Scottish Government. We will shortly publish our refreshed employability framework, which seeks to better align services for people out of work and thus help them to overcome their barriers to employment. We are also investing £64.6 million of European social funds to support employability initiatives worth £168 million in some of the most disadvantaged parts of the country. Through our youth employment strategy, we are focusing significant efforts on strengthening transitions for young people from school into appropriate training, work experience and employment. This is supported by an additional £30 million worth of investment.
Ian Gray.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for quite a broad brush reply to what, in all fairness, was a broad brush question, but the devil is often in the detail in this matter. In my own constituency in East Lothian, the number of people claiming job seekers allowance for over 12 months has almost doubled, and today's unemployment figures mean that that is unlikely, I think, to have improved. But behind even that detail, figures released yesterday showed that in East Lothian and East Renfrewshire, we've recorded the largest rises in female unemployment over the past 4 years. Those rises are over 275%. The Cabinet Secretary will be well aware of the strong link between female unemployment in particular and child poverty. And I know that the Scottish Government today have held a summit on women's employment. Can the Cabinet Secretary then indicate any practical policy actions which he might expect to emerge from that and which he will then implement, which might give some hope to those unemployed women in my constituency?
Cabinet Secretary.
The first thing I would say is that the Government recognises the seriousness of the issue that Mr Gray raises, and I think the debate yesterday in Parliament, the updates to our economic interventions and the variety of different interventions the Government is making to provide support to people to enter the labour market, and also to the support the Government is giving to the economy to create the job-growing projects that are possible, particularly in relation to capital investment, that all of this will assist the process of stimulating the economy and encouraging people back into employment. Mr Gray is absolutely correct that the Government has hosted today, along with the Scottish Trade Union Congress, a summit on female employment issues. I expect to hear the outcome of that event very shortly, and the link that Mr Gray establishes with child poverty is a link that the Government recognises very much as part of this process. The purpose of the summit has been to identify what further actions the Government can take forward to address this issue, and I give Mr Gray the assurance that the Government will take those points forward very seriously as a consequence of the dialogue that has taken place today.
Thank you very much. Question 16, Chick Brodie.
Presiding Officer, to ask the Scottish Government what recent discussions it has had with the UK Government regarding the regulatory regime in relation to payday lending.
Minister Fergus Ewing.
In April, I wrote to the UK Minister Norman Lamb seeking greater regulation of payday loans and urging the UK Government to consider a cap on interest rates for high interest and payday lending. Further to this letter, the UK Government has reached an agreement with the industry's 4 main trade associations to strengthen the industry's code of practice.
Fergus. Chick Brodie.
I thank the Minister for his answer. Veritech, a US software company, provides a small credit database to a number of US states and to Australia, a system which allows high street lenders to check whether customers have loans from other lenders and providers, and allows states to regulate, to cap these loans and to prevent these loans from rolling over, thereby protecting consumers from accruing huge debts. In light of the proliferation of high street lenders, will the Minister suggest that the UK Government look at a similar system of regulation?
Minister. Well, I was particularly interested in the idea that there is a method of technology that can detect whether individual potential borrowers have already got previous debts. I think that should be explored. With regard to the proposal that there should be regulation along the lines of certain USA states where payday lending is illegal and regulated in 37 states, we have already raised the idea of a cap with the UK Government. I think, Presiding Officer, this is a very serious issue and one where there are very strong arguments in favour of the cap. I'm not persuaded that the approach of the UK Government will be sufficient to address the problem, although I recognise that some progress has been made. And therefore, we will be repeating and renewing our efforts to regulate payday loans. If only we had the full range of powers in Scotland, then we would certainly be doing so.
Thank you very much, and I regret we're unable to take any more questions, so we'll now move to the next item of business, which is a debate